Hello everyone, good evening. So as some of you already know, my name is Andrea Miller. I'm a long-range planner for the Department of Metropolitan Development. Welcome to the sixth and final session of the weekday track of People's Planning Academy 2.0.
Woo!
Yeah.
Talk about what one does in school to become a long-range planner.
So a lot of them get a master's in urban planning. But that is not, but there are also, that's not personally for myself. I got a master's in public affairs, so there's more than one route to it, but by far the most popular is Masters of Urban Planning. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so without further ado, the sixth and final session of our class. So we have this one last final class tonight, the title of which is Moving Forward, Taking Action. And tonight we'll really be emphasizing providing you with resources you can take with you to help advocate for your communities. So we kind of started that a little bit last week, and we're just going to follow through on it more tonight. But before we really get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank you all again for taking the time out of your busy lives, out of your Thursday evenings, to spend some time with us and learn about transportation and planning for our city. So speaking for myself, one of the things I love about my job is getting to meet people passionate about their communities and helping them. And in our work at the city, we strive towards making Indianapolis a better place for everyone, but it's not something we can do alone. It's a concentrated effort, bigger than any one group. And in coming to these sessions, you've taken a step in educating and therefore advocating for yourself. And as was quoted in our first session, an educated, enlightened, and informed population is one of the surest ways of promoting the health of a democracy. So give yourself a hand. In all seriousness, give yourself a round of applause for the effort and time you've taken in completing the program. So, tonight's agenda. The very first thing we'll be going through today is an academy recap. So before we launch into new material, we thought it would be beneficial to review big picture concepts from our previous classes. We've covered a lot of material in a small amount of time, so I thought it would be nice to review and reflect on what we've learned. Following that, we'll be going over helpful planning tools. These are online resources that you can use to find out more about your communities, and Brad Bobian will be rejoining us to present that piece. Part 3, we'll have Daniel Hedgeland, our senior planner for information and innovation, who will be discussing emerging planning technology and the work he's doing to make planning more accessible to the public. In part 4, I'll be rejoining you to talk about the certified plan process and explaining what that is exactly and why you may find it beneficial. And then closing us out, Brittany Redd, our principal planner for land use strategy, will come to talk about additional resources and next steps for you. But first, that moment of reflection. Before we even got started with our regularly scheduled meetings, all the way back in September, we had a special kickoff event with guest speaker Joe Minikazi from Urban 3. And at this presentation, Joe presented his own thesis, which looks at our land use decisions from a very different perspective than we typically do. And his thesis was that cities are growing broke. So what exactly did he mean by that? And in essence, he was referring to the fact that for certain areas, the amount of property taxes generated, I'm sure we're all familiar with property taxes, the amount of money that those made did not cover the cost of the infrastructure supporting it. So this image was used in his presentation, and I think it does a lot better job explaining it than just words alone. So if you look at the parking lot, $1.40 per square foot of taxable revenue is gained by the city, and the street in front of it to get to the parking lot it costs $8.91 to provide it. So what that means is that when you're providing a street in front of these parking lots, and you're having like a deficit in your city budget. In contrast, something like a building, and there's a lot of different variables that can affect this, but in this particular building, it generates a taxable revenue of $34.60 per square foot, and that does cover the cost of the street that runs in front of it, all the maintenance that's required. So this example uses parking lots as the land use and streets as the infrastructure, but you could swap that out for a variety of different combinations. You could look at sidewalks, you could look at street lights, and you could look at a lot of other different types of land uses. So what he was saying was that what we decide to allow, encourage, and discourage in land use is not just about making complete communities and vibrant places that people want to be. It's that often when we make the opposite decision, we're also putting into question the financial solvency of our city and county. Because every mile of infrastructure we have is a mile we have to maintain. And this affects all of us. So imagine what we could do for our streets, for our schools, for our parks, for our libraries, with the extra money generated by simply having more productive land uses, not having massive empty parking lots lying on top of our land. So Joe challenged us to really think about the decisions we're making when it comes to what we do with our land. And it's something we should continue to keep in mind going forward. So that was our kickoff event. I know some people did miss it for a variety of reasons. It was on a different day of the week, and it also occurred for some of you before you even signed up for this class. So I would encourage you to go back and watch the video, which has been sent out over email, is also available on our webpage. But in our first actual class, the topic was Planning and Zoning 101. So you learned about what city planning is. Remember that it's Everest. It's planning to go to Everest, not Disney. That is that it's aspirational. It's meant to provide you with more of a vision to help in the decision-making process, rather than giving you an exact list of what you're going to do at every single step of the process. We also discussed who does the planning. So of course you have people like your long-range planning team, but it's so much more than that. We have groups like the Board of Zoning Appeals, we have groups like Indigo, we have nonprofit partners, we have the Indy Chamber. So it's more than just any one single entity. And we talked about the comprehensive plan and the different elements and focusing on land use and transportation. So this is where we introduced our thoroughfare plan, and we talked about the different classifications for streets and roads and how they come together to create our street network and system. And we talked about zoning. So Daniel talked about how the zoning ordinance is effectively the rules for development and how the way we structure them will inform development. Finally, we talked about how transportation and land use come together. So we had this activity. We asked you, just by looking at it, what do you think happens in these areas? And you guys were able to figure it out. So land use and transportation inform each other, and they create different types of places where people do very different types of things, so they act together. So in summary, Class 1, setting the stage and providing you with a general understanding of planning, in particular land use and transportation. And then we moved on to Class 2, on Indy's transportation history. We started off with a timeline activity, went all the way from the settling of Indianapolis to the rise of scooters. And in between those periods, a lot happened. So we had the streetcar system, which allowed for Indianapolis to expand, and the legacy of which still exists in our city today. And we also saw the rise of the car and how that transformed our landscape. Then we took a look at Indianapolis as it is right now, about our car dependency and what that has and will cost us both literally in dollars and figuratively when we think about household transportation costs and access to opportunity. But then we got a chance to talk a little bit about the future. We had Austin from Indigo come in to talk about the Marion County Transit Plan and upcoming developments for mass transit in Indianapolis. So in sum, Class 2, the goal of which was to gain a knowledge of Indy's transportation past to better understand how we got where we are today, what we've done recently, and where we want to be in the future. In our third session, Walkable Neighborhoods, we kicked off with an exciting game, you may remember this figure, intended to demonstrate what happens when you prioritize one method of transportation to the point of excluding all others. So for some, it comes with great benefits, and for the others, it comes with the exact opposite and a lot of alienation. And then we had Kim Irwin from Health by Design talk about walkability and why it's important for health equity. We talked about pedestrian safety and the things that contribute to it, things like the speed of the automobile mattering, sidewalks mattering, lighting mattering, and how that differs in areas throughout Indianapolis. So class 3, our goal was to understand how transportation affects access to opportunity and health in our communities. But of course, we couldn't leave out a class on transit-oriented development when you have a series looking at transportation in Indianapolis. So this is where we really dug into transit-oriented development, and we examined what it is. It's a mix of options, walkable, connected, has public amenities. We talked about why we want it, for mobility for those who don't drive, for increased employment opportunities, for economic growth. And we talked about what it looks like. So we spent some time going through the individual elements that make something called transit-oriented development, everything from facades to signage to art and curb cuts, so that you have the knowledge to be both critical and constructive of development in your community. But as beneficial as TOD is, it's also important to recognize the potential negative consequences that can result from this immense public investment, which is chiefly displacement. And while we often think of displacement in terms of gentrification, we contrasted that with the displacement that happens far more frequently in our communities, which is due to disinvestment. So we closed that section of the presentation with a look at a case study from Chicago about their equitable TOD ordinance, where equity was actually written into their code, and about how Indy is proactively addressing their problem as well. And then we also, we finished with a presentation from the city's Director of Sustainability, Katie Robinson, about Thrive Indy, because we previously discussed about the financial, health, and equity reasons to support alternative methods of transportation, but we hadn't actually spent that much time talking about how it also plays a role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping us address climate change. So class 4, learn what makes TOD TOD, understand the role TOD has in supporting climate resilience, and discover what we're doing to help with equitable TOD. Which leads us to last week, class 5, Development 101. We looked at development from the developer side to know a little bit about the types of things they take into consideration when they're doing a project to understand their perspective and have a better dialogue. So things like market feasibility, is there just enough demand in a given area to support this? Financial, do the numbers work? Can they make a profit from this? And also political, and how political controversy can influence the process, including things like the entitlement structure, and has the potential to bog down the process. And then, of course, you got the chance to make your very own site plan and experience a little bit of the give and take yourself. Brittany followed that up, talking a little bit more in more detail about the zoning process, about what the legal criteria is for a rezoning or a variance, and she provided you with a direct overview of how you can be involved in the process. Everything from registering in our community as a community organization so that you directly receive notifications and not just keeping an eye out for the orange signs, to what you should actually do in those public meetings in front of those boards. So class 5, learn about the development process in the private sector, what's important in those decision-making processes, and what your role is when it comes to development in your community. And that brings us to the now. So we have indeed covered a lot of material. I hope you found this review helpful in both refreshing your memory and also realizing just how much you've maybe learned. And of course, those video links I've been providing you in emails, as I previously mentioned, they're also available on our website. So if you ever want to go back and watch them again, or if you happen to miss one, they're available there.
And now I will hand it over to Brad to describe planning tools available to you.
All right, thank you, Andrea. It's good to be back. Glad you're here. So over the past decade or so, our profession has really become very democratized. There's been an incredible amount of tools that have come out online. In the city county building, we've been flying aerial photography of our city since the 1930s. But obviously that was only accessible to us, the people that had the keys to the cabinets they were in. Obviously with Google Maps and all sorts of things like that, it's much more accessible to people. And so there are a couple of projects that we worked on over the past few years to take our data that we have in our building and try to make it more accessible to you. And so I want to share those two with you. The older one that's been around for a few years now is IndyVitals. How many of you have heard about IndyVitals, used IndyVitals? All right, so a few of you. So IndyVitals is our attempt to look at defined neighborhood geographies, pull out 52 or so different indicators, and see how neighborhoods compare over time as well as with each other. And so we built this product with SAVI, Social Assets and Vulnerabilities Indicators, which is one of the largest community data platforms in the entire nation, housed at Indiana University. And so in IndyVitals, you can type in an address, you can go into a map, and you can learn about what's happening in the neighborhood around you. And so what we've done is defined specific geographies, which helps people see the same story. If you're looking to find your own geographies, it might frustrate you, but we wanted to make sure that regardless of who you were, what type of program you were, everyone saw the same story. All too often with data, depending on how you cut it, you can see different stories. And so IndyVitals pulls in a lot of information from the SAVI system, which is incredibly robust and complicated. And we pulled it into this kind of scorecard view. We've also added some data that was not in SAVI before. And so things like access to parks and greenways, things like that. If IndyVitals is not for you, it doesn't do what you need to do, there's also a way to click over into the SAVI system. And so you can access much more levels of data and kind of custom create your own geographies to learn. And so IndyVitals is available at indyvitals.org. And if you're interested in training on IndyVitals, my final training on that program is actually Saturday at Central Library at 10:30. So if you want to learn more, I'm happy to see you then. The newer tool that our team has worked on is something called Plan Indy. And so if you go to maps.indy.gov, that is the city's list of mapping applications. And so you'll find things like Map Indy and some crime stats and some property cards from the assessor's office, things like that. But Plan Indy, so maps.indy.gov/Plan Indy, the P and the I are capitalized, and that does matter. If you go there, you'll actually go to a new platform that we've built that allows you access to lots of pieces of our comprehensive plan that are map-based. And so whether it's land use or transportation, TIF districts, redevelopment areas, pedestrian plan, priority, all these layers of information that we have in our system, we've now turned on for public access for the first time ever. And so there's a couple ways you can access it when you first come in. There's a screen where you can click on land use or transportation or special districts, and that really kind of populates the menu for you. You can also type in an address, and so if you're interested in what's happening, what's planned for your area or planned for where that orange sign is, you can go in there and you can type in the address, and it spits out this 3-page what we call parcel report. And so this tells you everything from what it's currently zoned to what the land use plan says about it. It tells you if you're in a historic preservation district, if you're in a TIF district, who your elected representatives are, your mayor's neighborhood advocate is, the neighborhood organizations that claim a voice for you. And it also tells you some of the transportation aspects of what's happening around you. So it'll tell you the thoroughfare plan classification of the streets around your property, any plans that we have for widening those streets, for building new streets. It will also tell you any greenway or bikeway plans that we currently have around you. And so there's tons of information that normally you would have had to look through 5 or 6 or 7 or more PDF documents to see what relates to you. This is kind of a one-stop shop to give you information. There's also, the third page is a glossary that tells you every one of those fields that we have that we show you. We kind of tell you what it is, why it's important, and then where, if there is additional information, we provide a link to the city's website so you can learn more about things like the Greenways Master Plan, things like that. And so those are two tools that we've built recently, released, to try to increase access to some of the local data that we have. Before I turn it over to kind of Daniel to talk about like what's next in that world, are there any questions about these two tools? There'll be time at the end too. Sure.
I'm assuming it's web enabled and we don't need to have any special, anything, just go out and look at it.
It's completely open, it's free. Any web browser will work. And so if, indievitals.org, both of the tools should be mobile friendly anyway. So whether you're using your phone or your tablet or your computer, they should work flawlessly.
Well, thank you for creating that.
You are quite welcome.
If you needed support or you needed to wade through some of it, who do you contact?
You can contact our long-range planning team, and so so yes, I mean we're always here to help, and we Daniel will talk about this. So Plan Indy is really step one, so we're daylighting the information. And he's going to show you some examples about some thoughts we have about the next steps, and that's doing a better job of actually storytelling it and making it a little more user-friendly. And so this is step one. We've got grand plans to grow this, so we recognize that if you do have questions, we're here for you. And so you have lots of emails from Andrea. She might be your point of contact that can get you in the right place.
Thanks.
All right, and with that, I'll introduce Daniel to talk about what's next.
Okay, y'all. My title is Senior Planner for Information and Innovation. And long title, we're going to try and key in on this final word, innovation. And tech is one part of that, but hopefully maybe a little bit beyond that. So, as long-range planners, we're often thinking about the city as a whole. And think of all the plans that we've talked about over the past few weeks. The land use plan and the pattern book. The tools that we use to help guide growth and change in the future. They cover the entire county. And Indy Moves. It evaluated transportation projects across the entire county. The zoning ordinance. The rules that regulate development. These things also cover all of Marion County. And since I've been a city planner, both here in Indianapolis and in other places, I take a lot of pride in being able to kind of understand the big picture. But when I talk to people, one of the most common questions that I get about zoning ordinances or plans or things like that is like, how does this affect me? And I feel like this question makes a lot of sense because I spend a lot of time thinking about the city as a whole. But I mean, a lot of people, like, you're thinking about your house, you're thinking about your neighborhood, you're thinking about your neighbors, your family, and things like that. Cities like Indianapolis are complex places, and the big picture thing can be good, but these big picture documents make how does this plan or zoning ordinance affect me into somewhat of a tricky question. And it often leads to a lot of answers like, well, it depends. And then we spend 3 to 4 minutes trying to talk about a lot of details and things like that. So this diagram shows why answering how a big plan can affect a small place can be a difficult question. So reading zoning ordinances or long-range plans is often like following a flow chart or a choose-your-own adventure. To learn about the future of your property with the land use plan and the pattern book, you first have to look at a map, and then you find a type of typology. Here in the pattern book, we have living, mixed use, and working typologies. Then you have to see which specific typology applies to you. And then you have to see whether there are any sort of special circumstances in what are called overlay districts. And then, finally, once you have that information, you can open up the book and go to the page that tells you about how the type of community that's envisioned for your area. And this process can take a lot of time, and it can take people a long time to learn how to do this. And many people, including developers and contractors, I've worked with a bunch throughout my career, they often feel like this stuff is kind of confusing. And like when you get confused, you get angry and you get frustrated. And that's a super valid point, and it makes a lot of sense. We're not creating these plans to make you frustrated. We're creating these plans to try and help shape your community. And if you don't understand it, it's hard to help you shape your community's future. So what do we do? Well, there are a number of ways to fix this problem, but the two most common are we can either reduce regulations by cutting them, or we can make them easier to navigate. And I feel like, first and foremost, what I want to say is I feel like that there are often legitimate arguments in favor of reducing regulations. I'm not here to try and defend every regulation or every rule that the city has ever made in its history, or even necessarily all that exists today. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about why plans and ordinances can be so long. First, Indianapolis is a really big place. There are over 400 square miles here in Marion County. Second, Indianapolis is a very diverse place. Our rules and plans cover everything from the tall buildings downtown, to small villages like Broad Ripple and Irvington, to regional community centers, to regional commercial centers like Castleton and the International Marketplace, which are very different places in themselves. And then even more rural areas near the edge of the county, particularly to the southwest and the southeast. Each of these places need and they deserve plans and rules that fit their own needs. And to do that, it takes a lot of plans. It takes a lot of pages. And finally, these rules do a lot of important things. That includes shaping the built environment. And I've already talked with you in a couple classes about how the development rules affect the things that get built. But it also can do things like protect the natural environment and protect people. For example, like rules about whether people can build things in floodplains, or how we treat the area around streams can affect people's safety, and it can affect things like water quality. So like a lot of these rules, even though they take up a lot of room, they're pretty important. So I think it's fair to be frustrated with the complexity of the rules, but I do want us to kind of keep in mind that like they do important things. And that's pushing us to find new ways to help people understand what our work is, what we do, and also to help them more quickly get from the question, how does this plan affect me, to being able to understand how does the plan affect them. So at this point in the People's Planning Academy, we've talked about the land use plan and the pattern book several times. This is one of those documents that is designed to cover the entire county. It's definitely a big picture document. So just kind of a quiz. We've already talked a couple times. Marion County is about 400 square miles. How many parcels or pieces of property do you guys think are in Marion County? Say what?
1 million something.
It is less than 1 million. It's actually very, very close to 300,000. I appreciate the guesses, and also the accurate guesses. That's very impressive. So there are over 300,000 parcels in Marion County. That's a lot of parcels. But we only have one land use plan that covers over 90% of Indianapolis. The goal of a tool that we're working to develop, which is still internal, it's still under development, it's not available to the public, but it is something that we're trying to think about how does it fit into some of our workflows, is to try and to take this one big story that we have with the pattern book and be able to tell it 300,000 different ways. Ways that are personal to a piece of property, ways that are personal to you, ways that are personal to your family, to your neighborhood, and to your community. And so we feel like in a lot of ways kind of one of the most personal things is an address. And the goal behind something like a tool like this would be, okay, rather than pulling out the map and finding a place on a map, and a map that covers an area that doesn't necessarily feel like your neighborhood, your home, or something like that. What you do is you start off with an address, and you type in an address. And then once you type in an address, it gives you a customized map, rather than just like a map for a township or a larger area. This is a map that's focused on the place that you're interested in. And it pulls out, rather than telling you, hey, here are the 20 different types of typologies that could affect everywhere, it looks to see which ones are closest and pulls them out so that you can see those things right there. And in addition to, so like, okay, this is the parcel where the city-county building is located. There are two typologies. There's regional special use and core mixed use. And like, what does core mixed use mean? Like, that's kind of a tough idea. If like I was to quiz you guys right now, you probably wouldn't know. So what it does is you scroll down a little bit further and it describes what core mixed use means. And so like pretty quickly, without having to go to a map and then to a book, like all the information is there within 15 seconds. So you can understand, hey, what does the future of this property or my neighborhood look like? And then also, as y'all know, as we've described the pattern book, each typology has different uses, different recommendations, because kind of going back to Brittany's example of each typology is like a recipe, it's like a cake. All these ingredients together trying to make a community. One of the goals would be is like, okay, here are the uses. And in addition to here are the uses, sort of like a recipe, you don't necessarily want to put in 20 sticks of butter into the cake. There's an appropriate amount of butter to make it taste good. What we do right here is we tell you what the recommendations are for each of these uses. And then we tie it back to the overall comprehensive plan. Because in a lot of ways, trying to understand why we do, sometimes the things that we tell people to do don't seem to make sense when it's taken out of context. But when we tie everything back together and tie it back to the comprehensive plan, that you can know we're making these recommendations. Here's what your community is going to look like. Here's what the uses look like. And here's why the values that we're using to help guide some of these recommendations. With the ultimate goal trying to be like making it easier to help empower you and your friends and your family and your community to be able to engage with what the future of your community looks like. So this is a tool, this is a prototype. And so today we're talking a bit about like how can we get involved. And I feel like one way that you can potentially get involved is help us test new tools and techniques. I feel like we, as long-range planners, in some ways are storytellers, and we're constantly thinking of new ways to be able to talk to people and tell stories. And sometimes with things like TOD, it can be kind of complex. So if you'd be interested, and I believe we have a sign-up sheet here, if you're interested in trying to help us whenever we're trying to test out something new, if you'd be open to be guinea pigs, just so that you can come and tell us what you like, what you don't like, what you understand, what you don't understand, so that as we continue to reach out, it's more likely that people in the future will be able to understand some of the things that we're doing. That would be extremely helpful, and that's stuff that we're working on and trying to do in the future. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Andrea, and she's going to talk about another way that you can get involved with certified plans.
I don't think you should say guinea pig, though. Don't say beta testers.
That's beta testers. That in itself is a good beta test right there. Let me know. I shouldn't use the word. Thank you.
Yeah. In truth, I was the guinea pig. I've been helping Daniel test it for quite a while. So you guys are the beta testers. I was the guinea pig. So hello again. As Daniel mentioned, or I'm not sure if you mentioned, but I oversee the certified plan process. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what that is. What is the certified plan process? So it provides...
I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. Daniel, before you sat down, you said the plan was for 90% of Marion County. Who controls the other 10% plan?
The other 10%, when we started the planning process, there have been plans that have been done within 10 years since the Great Recession. And the basic idea was that there are plans that we created 3, 4, 5 years ago. They're still very relevant. And eventually the goal was to try and tie the rest of the county back into this one unified system. But we didn't want to be like, hey, we know we came to you 3 years ago, put together a plan, but we're going to come back and do it again. So we're honoring the plans that are in place. And with, at one point in the future, trying to get everything in the same system.
Thank you.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're fine. It was a good question. I was wondering if anyone would pick up on it because I cued in on it when Daniel said it. So I'm glad you asked the question. It was a good one. So what is the certified plan process? The certified plan process provides a path for neighborhood groups to have their community plans officially recognized by the Department of Metropolitan Development. I'll get into a little bit what exactly that means to be officially recognized by the department. But just a little bit, I wanted to provide you a background on the purpose of the certified plan process. So it recognizes the growing capacity of community planning. I have all of you sitting in front. You're motivated residents. You're learning all this new material about how you can, kind of help in your communities. And we want to acknowledge that there's an increased ability from our residents. And there are also a variety of nonprofits. So there are entities outside of the city that have good ideas, and we wanted to acknowledge that they play a role. So we want to support these efforts by provide a way for those plans to actually impact our policy, so it's not something that's just completely to the side. And we also wanted to find a way to strengthen community planning processes. When you can go out into your community and form these plans, that's really valuable, not just for yourself, but for the city as a whole. But back to what certification actually means. I said you get officially recognized by the department. So what that in fact means is first that you're considered when it's time to update the comprehensive plan. So while your individual certified plans are not adopted into the comp plan, what it means is that they'll be kind of first in line to what we'll take a look at when we are going through the process of updating. It'll also provide current planning, an additional layer of information when reviewing petitions. So it'll just be one extra source of information to provide guidance for them. And then it'll also be included in the Plan Indy planning portal, what Brad just showed you. So what does that mean for you? It'll provide an increased awareness in the community for what you have envisioned for your community. So even though it's not official city policy, maybe a developer coming in can see that and recognize that it represents the desires of the neighborhood, and that may impact their decision-making process. So essentially, it provides you with a more direct way to provide input to the city and staff, as well as to developers.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you say, I'm paraphrasing what you said, would make information available to potential developers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming you're saying, like, hey, this information would make you want to come develop in this area, or want you to come open businesses.
It
Or
could.
what incentive would that be?
It could, but not necessarily. So oftentimes, you may have recognized that what a neighborhood wants and what a developer wants are not often
Right.
the same.
That's my question. Is it more
So-
what the neighborhood wants or more?
Yeah, it's more about communicating that up front, because any developer who's coming in, sometimes you'll have like extremely local, well-networked developers, but a lot of times you don't. You just have people, or groups rather, coming from farther out, and they don't know anything about your communities. So just providing them with a little bit of extra input, and the fact that it's a certified plan kind of says you're well organized, to put it bluntly. But I do want to emphasize that while we will be examining certified plans when we're updating the comprehensive plan, we are not adopting certified plans directly into the comprehensive plan. So it's not a copy and paste. I just want to be clear with that, because I would hate for someone to go through the process and then feel that that was the expectation, and that won't be what's happening. But a little bit about the process. So you're like, okay, well maybe. So let's take a look at what you'll actually do going through the certified plan process, because we set these certain level of expectations, because if we're going to consider it when using it in the comprehensive plan, we need to have a sense that it's done to a certain level. So these slides aren't a definitive list, but they're to give you an idea of what's involved. So one of the biggest facets of the certified plan process is simply communication. So that involves talking to long-range planning staff such as myself early and often, not just like, I'm thinking about doing this, disappearing, coming back 6 months later. It involves informing other city officials, so informing your city councilor, informing your mayor's neighborhood advocate. Those are all required steps. And then having a community partner is recommended. So like a major entity, they can really help you in navigating the process. So communication is a key part of it.
Can you give me an example of a community partner?
Like if you were on the south side, the University of Indianapolis. It doesn't have to be that big, but that.
It could be a development corporation.
It could, yeah. CDCs are a big one, you know. So there are a lot of different options. And sometimes you'll get like a major private entity even that they, you know, they employ hundreds of people in the community, and that does mean that they care a lot about where they are, right? So there are a lot of different options, and it doesn't have to be that big, but they can really help in the process in providing you resources. So planning process and governance. So we do ask that you develop and follow a process charter, which is basically just the rules by which you go through this process. We ask you to create an engagement plan, and then of course we want you to actually act on it. And the goal is to make sure that the entire neighborhood is really engaged in this, and that it's not just a handful of, maybe well-intentioned, but just a handful of people who are speaking for an entire area. That's not what we want to happen. And then we have, of course, what you'll actually write up. So your general plan content. We'll ask you to define a study area, actually draw a boundary on a map. We'll ask you to back your plans with data and supporting evidence, and you can use tools like some of the ones that Brad was showing you with Indy Vitals. You will ask you to align with the comprehensive plan's vision and values. That's making Indy healthier, more resilient, more inclusive, and competitive. We'll ask you to create goals, strategies, and action steps. And of course, we want you to actually be able to act on them, because what use is a plan that never does anything? So we ask you to identify partners to help make the plan happen. There's also specialized levels of certification beyond it, so you can work in closer conjunction with long-range planning to come up with land use and transportation options. So in these, because they're a lot more legal, DMD staff will be a lot more heavily engaged, but it's an option. But just to, I do want to say that plan certification isn't for everyone, and just because, you know, a plan isn't certified doesn't mean it's not important. So that's not what we're trying to say here. If you participate in the past, we're not saying that it doesn't matter. It absolutely does. And there are situations where maybe certification isn't what you really want to go for. You know, maybe you want to do just like one smaller scale project, or maybe it's more about building community and consensus and just kind of going through that process and solidifying that. So the important thing to remember is that our department is using the certification as a way to embrace community planning and provide a pathway for you to impact official policy. So we have to make sure the processes are actually inclusive and the content is developed in a way that we can use it, which is why we set those standards. So if you're interested in finding out more, we have a webpage on the IndyGov site, which when I send this out to you, you'll be able to copy and paste it. And on that webpage, you'll find information like the Certified Handbook, which provides a more comprehensive overview of what I just talked about. And then it also has some additional resources, such as some document templates. So I mentioned a process charter and engagement plan, and you're like, I have no idea where I would even start. And if that's the case, but you're interested in going through the certified plan process, we have some document templates that can kind of help guide you along to get you started. And if all else fails, of course, you have your trusty DMD staff available. So you can always contact me. I have my contact information there. I also have my business cards on the back. And then always remember that if you have a question and you're just uncertain, feel free to ask. Even if you're like, well, I have something that's, you know, I'm interested in doing the certified plan process, but it's something maybe, I'll give you an example, like it's something related more to health. Well, I know a planner from the health department, and she's talked to me about how much she would like to, you know, get more communities involved with that. So if I don't know the exact way to approach something, I'm pretty sure I can find someone who can. And that's all for the certified plan process. Now I'm going to hand it off to Brittany.
Excuse me, I got a question.
Yeah, sure.
So now, as a neighborhood community, if we as a whole wanted a certified process, because we know we have whole streets that are empty lots.
Mhm.
Is this what we would do? Because when the city starts bringing in developers and people want to buy our areas, they would have to meet with us first, or we would do this because we gonna have to pull our money and we gonna have to say what we can do to buy those areas.
So the certified plan process, it's more of a way to inform people. It cannot promise that development will help in a certain way. So what this process does do is it informs long-range planning staff about what's happening, and also, like I mentioned, you notify like elected officials like your city county councilor and mayor's neighborhood advocate. And so the idea is that kind of collective group can helps guide the process, but as we've discussed in previous sessions, what the city can and can't do when it comes to setting rules regarding development and land use and rezoning. It's not always 100% what the community would like.
Not that, but how do we get people that are interested in moving our areas to at least meet with us?
To meet.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. If we have a certified plan process, the city now knows, okay, they're serious, but somebody else wants this street. But we also want this street. Is that the process for us now meet?
And that's my question too, because what kind of teeth does this have?
No.
And, house is backed up for what she wants to do.
Yeah. So I hadn't previously considered the approach of neighborhoods actually wanting to be informed because you have the option of signing up for where you're notified when these rezonings happen. We can't make developers meet with you. So to your question, you're like, what teeth does this have? The biggest role it would have would be guiding in the comprehensive plan, so that when it comes to rezonings and such, like, it can influence those decisions.
And I'll add to that. So you establish a registered community organization, right? And that conveys some certain abilities to you. So you get notice. Can I talk to Mike? It's on record. I don't work for the city anymore.
Yeah, you don't work for the city, Brad.
So I was talking about registered community organizations, and so that comes when you register with us. That comes with certain benefits. One is you get notice, and so whenever someone wants to do something in your area, you're mailed a notice about that. That comes with the ability to delay a hearing, and so if they're not meeting with you, you're saying we need more time, you can request what's called an automatic continuance for that rezoning or that variance. And so you can also stand up in front of the boards and commissions and say, we've reached out to this petitioner, they've been non-responsive, and I will tell you that matters to some of our boards and commissions. That if you've had a honest attempt to reach out and talk and negotiate, and they've stonewalled you, that says something, right? So that's important. I will say the certified plan is kind of another tool, another step. And so it cannot force a developer to talk to you. We have no tool to do that. If a developer does not want to talk to anyone, that's their right. You make the argument in front of the boards and commissions about that. But what the certified plan does give you is, again, it's in front of the staff reviewers, and so the staff reviewers are looking at it. They're looking at what the official plan, comprehensive plan says, but they're also saying, but we've also got this neighborhood-based document here that says this, and as they negotiate and talk back and forth with developers, that will likely come up. We also mentioned it's on the Plan Indy portal, and so if a developer is going in and saying, what's the plan say, what's the thoroughfare plan say for my property, it will also flag it as being in a certified plan area, and so they're made aware that developer, if you don't know anything about this neighborhood, there's a group of people that care that created this document. It probably behooves you to pay attention to it because they're likely to bring it up at that public hearing. And so it's just additional tools to kind of give you give you reason for development partners like that to come talk to you.
You got a question?
So I'm just trying to understand why I would want a plan, right? So can you, not me personally, but someone, some
Yeah.
people. So can you tell us a simple example of when a plan existed and it helped facilitate something?
So, you mean in terms of like someone had a certified plan and X happened as a result?
Yes.
So I'm currently going through certification with the Near East Side. And it's too soon to tell for me. So this is the first process that I've been active in. And
I have an example.
yeah, you have an example?
Yeah, so the most recent community that has a certified plan is the South, was it South?
It's so, yeah, it's
Yeah.
so indie.
So, yeah, So Indy has a plan. So they reached out to me and they said, so one item of our quality of life, or is it a quality of life plan?
It's a quality of
Yeah,
life.
quality of life plan
They were the
includes.
pilot process.
Yep. So includes a land use plan. So Daniel mentioned that the 10% of Marion County that's not included in the land use plan includes those communities that have plans that are 10 years old or younger. So the south side is one of those plans. So I told them if this is an element of your quality of life plan, maybe this can also be an opportunity for us to work with you to implement the land use element of your quality of life plan and make that part of the larger Marion County land use plan update. So because I saw that, that was like a trigger to me, like, hey, you have this on the books, let's make this official.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a newer process. So we have, So Indy did our pilot in 2017, and Near East Side is currently going through it now. So this is a newer program. So you're bringing up really good questions, and we're hoping to evolve this process further. It's something I've been working on. Yes.
Is there an optimal size for a given sort of neighborhood or community where it makes sense for that organization to pursue, or that group of homes or neighbors to pursue something like this, a certified plan?
I mean, I wouldn't say I have like an exact number. I will say if you draw a boundary that's too large, you run the risk of having groups that feel like maybe they're not part of that neighborhood, but they kind of got lumped in with you. So that's a risk. But other than that, I would say like if you have like a 2-block area, that's definitely a red flag that the group is not really interested in doing a community plan. That's really just like we have a very specific idea for our neighborhood block. But I haven't run into that. So far. So yes.
Answers were like that Brad was talking about getting in front of the board, the commission about the variance, the notice, blah, blah, blah. But what if, like she's asking about vacant lots, what if someone's development does not need a variance or a zone change? They're just going to build the same kind of houses or whatever.
That is a gap that in that case, like unless I'm forgetting something, we talked about this previously. If there isn't a rezoning, if there isn't a variance, if they own the land, they have, those property rights and they can build on them. So that is something that, we can't control everything, evening. So, yes.
I guess my question is more of a policy focused question.
Mhm.
So I know the city offers incentives for developers, and that's the part of the process that the city can control, the incentivizing the project.
Mhm.
So has there been a discussion about incentivizing or making there a requirement for a certain number of community engagement before incentives are granted by the city to a developer?
That's a good question. I'm actually not familiar. So that is literally not long range. That is,
Yeah, it's a policy thing.
I know.
There have been a conversation
Yeah, so there are a lot of affordable housing tax and credits and a lot of things that I don't know the ins and outs of, so.
Yeah,
Brad
and
is
so
here.
city incentives is not something that my team really controls and gets involved with. I will say, when Develop Indy, the mayor's office, groups like that work with city incentives, there's a growing recognition that there has to be community benefit from that, and so some of the more recent incentives that have been offered have come ties with a minimum wage, living wage type of requirements, with workforce or affordable housing minimums and some things like that. And so that is something that is on the radar. And Brittany.
I just wanted
Whole
to.
trio.
I just wanted to add. So before my time with long range planning, I did work in community investment. So I have a little bit of idea of how this plan can impact developer incentives. So one way is through the home and CDBG programs, which are huge federal allocation dollars. And when our coordinators look at applications for those, they do look if these are quality of life areas, if there's a plan on the books, and they do consider community involvement. So.
Can you say that again, Brittany?
So home and CDBG. So home. CDBG, yeah. So home doesn't stand for anything. It's home. I think it's like partnership or something, and CDBG stands Community Development Block Grant.
Is that, is that like the INHP anchor partner programs, would that fall in that category?
I'm not familiar. So INHP is a separate nonprofit from the city. However, they do receive dollars from the cities. So if INHP receives CDBG money from the city, that still
Falls in the same way.
Well, who funds it directly from HUD, right? Yeah.
what'd you say?
Who funds it directly?
Home and CDBG.
Yeah, those are directly from HUD to.
Yep.
This is something.
I open up the door for these questions. I only have a little bit experience in community investments.
It's like, ask Brittany
Policy,
knows.
so you don't get to make policy, but maybe you can suggest to who. It would be nice as the neighborhood association to know when the city acquires property. And the reason behind that is, this is the law school of me coming out. When the zoning, whatever the zoning classification is, the federal constitution, the courts have said that's part of their property rights. Okay? And so you can't, it'd be real hard to force a private owner to change the zoning. Okay? But it'd be nice for neighborhoods to know when the city owns property, because it may be something that's property that's zoned for a gas station or something worse. When the city owns it, that's your chance to change the classification. Now the city may not want to do that because it makes the property less valuable, but it would be nice if there's some kind of mechanism whenever the city acquires a piece of property, just like we get notified about zoning variances, we get notified the city just acquired this property, is classified such. And at least that gives us an opportunity to get with our city county council to see if we can get that zoning down. So that now somebody that wants to build a gas station or something worse would have to come to us on a vacant piece of land versus where now, if they don't need a variance, they wouldn't have to come to us. So that'd be nice to get something like that.
One more point that I wanted to add for home and CDBG, they also look at applications who have support from the community development corporations. So I would also encourage you to be in communication with the CDC in your area.
So it's related to this zone's comment question. So if you're not gonna, you did seem too excited about sending notices out to neighborhoods about when the city acquires property. Is there a website where we can look and see what the city's getting?
Oh, yeah, so there's Renew
What
Indy.
is that?
So, go ahead.
So, city-owned property is a complicated thing. The property that we buy outright is run through Renew Indianapolis, and so you can go to renewindianapolis.org and you can see the properties in, that's what we call our land bank. So those are properties that we hold title to. There's a whole host of properties that different departments and public agencies have acquired over time that may not be used for public purposes. That's a little harder to figure out. And then the bigger thing is, tax sale and surplus property that we have the right to acquire, but we actually, that goes through the treasurer's office and the county sale, but we actually don't take title, and so we do not technically own it. And so there's that. I hate complicating things, but the idea of when the city acquires property, if the main way we do that is through our land bank. There are only 900 properties remaining in the land bank right now, I believe. And so we haven't purchased property for the land bank in quite some time, aside from things like Sherman Park and some major industrial properties. And so I appreciate that. I think that's a great idea. That doesn't happen through the land bank anyway, all that often.
When you're talking about the future,
Yep.
what are you supposed to be digitizing things? I mean, you have, the city has the land bank, but there are all these other entities that are quasi-government entities, equivalent to the city. You can call it what you want. Why is there not one centralized, why are you not putting together one central place? Where each department actually needs to accept responsibility, putting in what they have to successful for everybody's
I will put that in as a very good idea. I will share that we share that.
It's sort of like all the departments in Indianapolis, like DPW and code enforcement, they're all their own little factories, they're working together, which is really absurd.
I will take that back, but yes, I can't necessarily disagree, but yes, over time, various flood control districts and various iterations. There were 16 iterations of DPW before DPW was called DPW,
Right.
and so understanding what exactly we
Working
own.
with the various folks too.
So I recognize that that's a good idea, and that's something that we'll take back to the powers that be. All right. Any final questions before I sit back down? We've got question time at the end too, so when we get through this final piece, maybe we'll stir up some more questions. All right.
All right, so Brittany, you just got to sit down. All right, I'll hand it over to Brittany.
My apologies, Tony. I wasn't trying to jump over your questions. I thought it was more of like a comment. Okay. We provided you with a lot of resources, a lot of web pages, a lot of places that you can go to get more information and more clarification. And I'm going to provide you with even more. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is this map. Is anybody familiar with this map? Anybody? The map of Indianapolis? Kinda. Yeah, it's kinda. Okay, so if you're looking at this map, it might be confusing and perhaps overwhelming, but it's very important. So this is the map of the units of government in Indianapolis, Marion County, Indiana. Our community has a very unique local government. In 1970, Unigov went into effect and it transformed city and county government. The city limits expanded to the county and many functions of the city, government, and county were consolidated. So I don't know about you, but I work for municipal government, obviously, and I still get confused about who does what. So I found this when I started, and I thought it would be a valuable resource for you. So this is the Unigov Handbook. It's a great resource to answer questions like, what is Unigov? How does it work? How can I participate knowledgeably in local government? And really, who does what? So this was compiled by the League of Women Voters of Indianapolis, and it was also informed by community members and government workers. So it's a valuable resource. I have the website for you to access this publication. I really encourage you to check it out so you can really get familiar with our complex local government.
Are we the only city that has that?
Only city in Indiana, yes, right? In the nation, no.
Well, since
Right.
unique, that's why I asked.
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely unique, but it's not,
Exclusive. to us.
yeah, exactly. We're not the only local government that does that. Also, if you want to take a deeper dive into city planning, you can check out the Indiana Citizens Planners Guide. It really goes into details about the legalities of planning and then also planning best practices. So you can check that out on indianaplanning.org. Also, so this is a state statute that provides you with access to most government meetings. So this is the Indiana Open Door Law, and it's a handbook that provides information about this. So you can't speak at all public meetings, and you may not be able to attend them all, but according to this law, you can, most of them when there is a let me read this. The government agencies must hold official meetings of a majority of their governing body, such as like the council, the board meetings, publicly. So wanted that to be available for you to check out. Also, a lot of you may be familiar with the Mayor's Action Center. It's a great place for you to give feedback, request non-emergency services, and report issues like potholes, missed trash collections, abandoned vehicles, traffic signals and signs, and as you probably know, zoning violations.
Really hate to interrupt, but the app is even better than calling the number.
Yes.
Because
So
you can report it and things are done in days. I mean, like a day or two is amazing.
I agree. So those of you that love mobile apps, Request Indy does the same thing. You can request those services and everything that the Mayor's Action Center does, except it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So thank you for pointing
It's
that out.
amazing. And can I add something, Brittany?
Yes.
As a community person on code compliance, it's real good to make sure you have that tracking number or whatever they give you. Because if you go to, if it doesn't get done, you go to your mayor's neighborhood advocate. If you have that tracking number, the mayor's neighborhood advocate is really able to work for you. But if not, then you got to start from zero. So whether you use the phone, the old way like the old folks do, or you use the newer way like the young folks do, have that tracking number for your mayor's neighborhood advocate.
Thank you. Also, we've mentioned this before, your local officials are a great resource for you. They're there to be advocates for you, so I would encourage you to reach out to them. If you don't know who your local official is, again, here's a URL, so you can go directly to that. So just brief about city county councilors. Those are great. We talked about the role that they play in land use decision making, so make sure you reach out to them. They make laws. They approve the county budget, levy taxes, distribute funds for city county operations, serve on board and commission. So they're a huge resource that you need to make sure that you know who they are and you talk to them, inform them about your concerns or even things that you want to advocate for. Also, mayor's neighborhood advocates. These are appointed by the mayor. So I want to show you their jurisdictions. So they're across the city, and they're also your advocates, and they can provide you with valuable information on what's happening in the city. So those are a few resources that I wanted to share with you. Also, I want to talk a little bit about next steps. Now that you've completed People's Planning Academy, what happens now? So the first thing, some of you attended Tuesday's meeting on TOD. So this was an opportunity for you to have your voice heard when it comes to the transit-oriented development, our zoning update. So we talked a little bit about the regulations around transit stops and what that could look like. So that will continue on. And if you want to stay informed about that, you can go to indytod.com to hear about when the community workshops happen. And then also, like, just in general, what the timeline is for that effort. Also, we have the Equitable Engagement Network. So this network was created as an attempt to tackle the underrepresentation of individuals in planning processes. So we want to make sure that the people that are engaged in planning represent the community. So one way that we decided to tackle this is to connect with community organizations that serve these populations. So one thing that came from this, we had a AmeriCorps Vista, Aisha Shears. She conducted research, reached out to these communities that have been historically underrepresented in planning processes, and just asked them and conducted surveys about what is limiting their participation, what are the issues, and a report came from that. So we can really get at the heart of why communities aren't participating in those processes. So I want to encourage you all, if you're a member of an organization or if you work at an organization that serves historically underrepresented populations, please sign up. Can somebody pass out the, it's like a beautiful sign-in sheet for you to, for you to provide your contact information so we can add you to that network. Not yet. But we'll send it out to you. We're gonna distribute, it's not quite finished, but the goal is to share it, right? Right. Also, the last thing is Planners Night Out. So one of the things we wanted to do was provide you with an opportunity to learn from your cohort. So we want to identify planning events that are happening around the city and get you guys to attend those together, and then we can debrief about your thoughts and things like that after the event. So we're gonna be in contact with you for our first Planners Night Out, so we can continue this conversation. And then also that you guys can continue to interact with one another now that you are citizen planners. So the last thing I have is a congratulations to you for you to celebrate. Thank you so much for taking this huge leap to educating yourself about planning so you can, well, I won't say become advocates because I feel like all of you are advocates for your community, but equip yourselves with this really important knowledge to be even better advocates. So I said that the last thing, sorry. This is the important part. So we want to make sure that we get your certificates to you. So Andrea will send out, or I don't know if you may have already sent out, but she'll send you an email requesting your address. However, we also have another sign-in sheet for that. So we'll send that out to you. But yeah, we want to make sure that we get that to you so you can have that like memorabilia celebration of the past 6 weeks with us. And thank you to the INRC. This is the INRC has been a phenomenal partner for People's Planning Academy this year and our first year. So one really great event that you can participate in is Neighbor Power Indy, which will take place in March. This is an opportunity for you to learn about what's happening across the city, learn from neighbors, learn from community stakeholders about efforts that they've undertaken. Yeah, so that's something you can look forward to. Do you guys have any last comments? All right. Do you guys have any questions? I know this was a lot of information today, and you guys had a lot of questions. All right. Well, Thank you so much for participating in People's Planning Academy.